Hi, welcome again to Videos from the Ville. This is Professor Greenawalt, and this is Public Administration, Government 241. Today we want to talk about grantsmanship. We're talking about intergovernmental relations, public policy formation. We want to talk about grantsmanship. How do you write a grant? You'll find that there are few colleges and universities and that offer any courses whatsoever in grantsmanship. There are few people who understand or know much about grantsmanship. When I came into my job in Greene County, Virginia, as Director of Community Development, essentially, again, I was Assistant County Administrator, and I pretty much oversaw about 2/3 of just about everything that the county did. You find that one of the jobs that was dumped in my lap was I was responsible for writing all grants that were submitted by Greene County to state and national governments, state and federal government. And I had never written a grant in my life. I was squeamish about that. I was scared. So I went about trying to learn how to write grants before my first big grant was due for renewal, and that was the one for our office. We had a large grant from the Community Services Administration that essentially provided the salaries for most of my 18 people, and without that grant, the office and all the assorted activities that we would that we took care of would disappear. So I talked to the county administrator about it. He understood, and we thought that we'd see what we could do. He could do to help me learn about grantsmanship. Now, he assured me that my predecessors knew little, if anything, about it either. Excuse me. But you find that I saw a grantsmanship workshop that was being offered in Northern Virginia, in Arlington, and the county agreed to spend the $500, and that was quite a bit of money at that time, to send me. And I went there for a weekend, and my trip through the process of learning grantsmanship was on its way. One thing I can share with you about this local area is that every spring for over the last 20 years, the Camp Hill Library, local library, they have had a workshop, an all-day workshop to teach individuals who are interested grantsmanship. I think they ask for a fee of about $20 or $25, and you spend all day with them, and you become much more familiar with the different types of grants that are out there and how to do grantsmanship. So it's something to remember and take a look at if you might be interested. But let's see what I might be able to share with you to at least get you in the mindset or prepared to deal with grants in a rudimentary way. First, we need to start out with the tools of grantsmanship. What are the tools that every grantsman needs? Well, first and foremost, for money from the national or federal government, you need to look at the catalog of federal domestic assistance. Now, the catalog of federal domestic assistance, when I first started to do grants in 1979, was about that thick. I'm not kidding. Thin paper, small print, and it was on the credenza right behind my desk, and perhaps was the most important thing in my office for the over 2 years that I was in Greene County. You find that today the catalog of federal domestic assistance is online. It's online. You can still find hard copies of it at your library. It's generally in the public documents section. Okay? The catalog of federal domestic assistance. Now, what the catalog does is it lists every federal program that gives grant money out, and that means giving it to states, to localities, to institutions, nonprofit organizations, and to individuals. So The Catalog of Federal Domestic Assistance gives you all the information you need about each and every grant. For example, it will tell you who's eligible to apply, how much money is available in the total program, what is the average size of grants that were given last year. It tells you time guidelines, when you have to have your grant proposal in and when they're going to answer you. It tells you whether or not you need a letter of intent. There are many grants for which one must send a letter to tell them that you're going to apply. If you simply apply without having sent that letter of intent, they won't even look at your application. It'll go into the trash and be forgotten. So you have to see if there's a need for a letter of intent. It will give you a contact person. It will give you telephone numbers, emails. The contact person is very, very important because that will be your first line of information that when you need information about that particular grant, that's the person you would go to. Let's see. Now the Catalog of Federal Domestic Assistance is organized two ways. It's organized by department, so every department of the national government is listed and all the different programs underneath it are listed. So you have the Department of Commerce, the Department of Education, the Department of Homeland Security, and so on and so forth. They're all there. Okay? What you find, however, that the catalog is also organized functionally so that all the educational programs are listed, all the programs having to do with criminal justice might be listed. And interestingly enough, for example, if you go down and look at all the programs under education, they're not all under the Department of Education. For example, the Department of Interior will have some educational programs listed. They do a program in many of the national parks in the West about an educational program about the restoration of the wolf to the far West. This would be an example of an educational program that isn't done by the Department of Education, but done by the Department of Interior. Another example of this would be the schools in New Jersey years ago used to practice something called the Scared Straight program. You take at-risk young people and take them into the prisons where the prisoners would play along, and they would harass the kids as they were going through the prison, telling them they couldn't wait to get their hands on them when they would come into the prison and join them, to try to deter the young people from any further bad behavior. Here, this was a educational program, but it's being done by the correctional system or by the U.S. Justice Department. So, the functional program, it's a functional listing, is the second way that all these programs are organized. So the Catalog of Federal Domestic Assistance, you can find it in the public documents section of the library, hard copy, or you can just find it online. It is a bit overwhelming the first time you look at it. And there are grants in there that individuals and private organizations and nonprofits may apply for as well. So that's your first tool. The second tool is the Federal Register. The Federal Register is the daily newspaper of the national government. It's published Monday through Friday. It's published at different government publishing office locations around the country, and it's mailed to all the recipients. I received it in the mail every morning, and all the table of contents is right on the front cover. This is a incredibly boring, hard to skim document. It's written by lawyers for lawyers, but you find that all the I would first thing in the morning when I was wide awake and had lots of energy, it's the very first thing that I would take a look at and see if there were any articles in there that I needed to read, any articles that I needed to save for future reference. Now, what's the purpose of the Federal Register? Federal Register will tell you if what the federal government is considering doing in the future. So there may be a notice in there about a possible grant program that you may want to be involved with, so you should know about it. There will be information in there about grant programs that are existing and the federal government's thinking about getting rid of them. So if you have any of those programs and running any of them, you'd like to know that too. And it tells you about federal government programs that have been abolished and are being dismantled. You might want to know about that as well. So you find that an action by the federal government is not considered to be complete and final until it's been published in the Federal Register 3 times. The Federal Register is a very important item to have and take a look at every day, so you essentially know what the federal government is doing and where it's going. Now, the third and final tool for all grantsmen is the state version of the Federal Register. Every state government publishes their own version of the Federal Register for the state level. In Virginia, it was called the Guide. I forget the name in Pennsylvania, but it was called the Guide, and it came out once a month. Because whereas the Federal Register comes out every business day, the state of Virginia had far less business going on at any one time than the federal government did, so they could do a once monthly item. So you want to get the state version of the Federal Register as well and take a look at that. All right, now that you know the tools of grantsmanship, you have those 3 things. You want to then, these are some very broad, basic tips for grantsmen that many are just common sense, but some people have little, so let's go over these tips for grant writing. Well, the first thing that you need to do when you're considering writing a grant is make sure that there's no misunderstanding or conflict between the program professionals and the political leaders. Let me give you examples of as we go through. Well, here a good example was I had gotten a phone call from the Virginia Department of Education on a Tuesday, and they said that they had I don't know, several $1 million left over at the end of the year, and would Greene County like any of it for educational purposes. And we had been considering expanding our vocational technical programs for some time, and we didn't have the monies to do it. So I thought, here's an opportunity to do just that. So I said, yeah, we would like $500,000. And again, $500,000 in 1979 is a lot more than it is today, and this was in the deep South as well, in the South as well. So the money went a long, long way. And they said, sure, Greene County has a good reputation. We know you use the money frugally. We know you're not wasteful, you're not corrupt. We would love to give Greene County $500,000 to expand their vocational technical education. You just have to put together the grant for it. So I went over and I asked the county administrator about it. He was just as happy as I was about the opportunity to do this. And we got the land use planner, who was also a good writer. We sat down with him, and from Tuesday afternoon on to Monday, we wrote the grant and proofed it, and it was ready to go for the next school board meeting, which was on a Monday. So we had to get the approval of the Greene County School Board. We thought they shared this goal of expanding vocational technical education, and we didn't even see the need to talk to them. And they were appointed by the county commissioners. In Virginia, the county commissioners are called county supervisors, okay? And they weren't elected at the time, so they were very dependent upon the county regular government, if you will. Well, we didn't talk to them. We thought they'd be on board. Well, we went to the school board meeting. We made our presentation. It all went well. And after we were done, they conferred briefly and they said, we're going to hold judgment on this. We're going to postpone action on this. And they adjourned our meeting. And the county administrator, Julius, and myself were just shocked. Why wouldn't they approve this? Why wouldn't go ahead and approve this and go ahead and get the $500,000, which would have been enough to buy the equipment for a program that we had in mind with textile processing? Could have bought the equipment, bought the textbooks for the kids, and it would have paid for the teachers for at least 2 years. So it would have been, we would get the program well on its way. But after the meeting was over, the school board sat down with the administrator and myself, and they said, you know, Charlie, Julius, we're very happy that you did this. It's a good piece of piece of work. We'd like to do it, but we wish you'd talk to us first. We don't believe we have enough room in the vocational technical education building to do this. So we're going to hold off on this. We're not going to approve it right now. We're going to hold off, and we're going to wait until we have the building capacity to handle such a program. Well, we said, you have it. You have it at another area of the county called Dyke. There's the Dyke School, and we used the basement. Whole basement we used as a senior nutrition center Monday through Friday. I think it was actually Monday through Saturday. Monday through Saturday we provided a very nutritious brunch, if you will, for all the people that would come, and we provided activities there for them. And that essentially, those centers were open, as I said, 6 days a week, with the exception of Sunday. And they could always get a good meal there, and they always had activities there. And if they had any other needs, our senior center coordinators would try to work with the rest of county government and help them. Well, we had 2 floors above that senior nutrition center at Dyke that were empty, were vacant. They were an old school, but it was a solidly built school, and there was nothing wrong with it whatsoever. It was in sterling condition, and we thought, why don't you just put your program there? Well, they said they wanted to keep it together. They turned down the grant. So please, before you spend all the time and effort writing a grant that you think would be approved by the county political leaders, you should sit down, talk to them, and be certain that they're going to approve it before you write it. So make sure there's no conflict between the program professionals and the political leaders, number one. Number 2, you may want to discuss local needs with federal funders. You want to see what the people in Washington, or the people that are making the decisions for the federal government, are interested in funding. You have to remember that some of these people that work for the federal government and awarding grants, they are in these capacities for years. And if you are reading grant requests and deciding who's going to get grants for decades, you might develop some biases, and you will believe that one type of approach is better than another. So it's good to try to talk to the funders before you write the grant and kind of see if you can detect which approaches to solving problems they might tend to favor. That is very, very useful. Well, let's take a look at some of the other things you want to do here. You also want to obtain copies of prior grants that have been successful as blueprints, as templates, as models to follow to base your grant upon. Luckily, I was lucky. I was fortunate that my office had 6 years of prior grants to look at. We were 6 years old, and there were 6 grants that had been written prior to mine. So I got those grants and studied them and looked at them, and I used those as a model to base my grant proposal, my first grant proposal, on for the office as a whole. So that's something that's very, very important. If you can find some successful grants from the past and try to see how they were set up. Another thing you can do is just what I started out the discussion by mentioning. You can attend grant workshops. Attending grant workshops will not only give you the tips on how to do it, but you'll also meet some of the funders who make decisions on giving out money. They might be some of the instructors, and they can provide you with good information and maybe some tips on how to obtain money from their particular department or agency. You'll meet people who are in the same boat as you are, who are in the same shoes that you are, people that are responsible for writing grants as well. You can compare notes with them over time. That kind of a contact is extraordinarily useful as you try to help one another over the years. Okay, so attend grant workshops. You, unfortunately, I have to tell you that you have to ask for more money than you need. You need to request more funds than you need. When I first went to Greene County and was writing my grant applications, we costed the grant applications to the penny, and we asked for just that much money and not one penny more. And I was being very successful. I was getting all my grants accepted, but I was always getting the grant accepted, but then not enough money to awarded to do what we promised. I was always being given 90% of what I would ask for. So I soon realized that the federal government had a fudge factor of 10%, that you needed to inflate your request by 10%, whatever it was. That the federal government simply thought that you were inflating, that all requests were inflated by 10%, so they just cut or reduced the amount of money that everyone would be awarded by 10%. So unfortunately, I learned that, and so I started to inflate all my grant requests from that point forward by 10%. Now, having said that, I have not been responsible for writing grants for a county for many, many years. So I don't know if there's a fudge factor now, and if there is, I don't know what it is. So what my advice to you would be is to do exactly what I did. You cost the program exactly to the penny. You ask for exactly that amount of money and no more, no less, so that if it's awarded, you can do the job. And after a little bit of time, you will find out what the fudge factor is, if there is one, and you'll be able to talk to other people in your field and figure that out as well. So ask for more money than needed. Very important, actually, is to write the grant in bureaucratic language. Don't use the King's English. If there's particular acronyms, if there's particular slang, or there's language that is used within your subject area, go ahead and use it. Go ahead and use it, so you will seem to fit right in, and you will seem to be absolutely in touch with your area. Another thing that you need to do is hand deliver the grant application. When the application is done, particularly your first ones, always, if you're within driving distance, if you're within a day's driving distance, or perhaps you have some extra funds and you could fly there, you should take your grant the first time you apply for a grant in a certain area, and you should hand it to the reviewer. Shake their hand, look them in the eye, sit down, and have a chat with them about where you're from, what you're doing, what you hope to do, and get to know them. This is exactly what I did when I was finished with my first grant for the Community Services Administration. I drove to Philadelphia, which was the regional office of the Community Services Administration. That's where the reviewer was for our program. So I handed her the grant application. We sat down and we chatted for 20 or 25 minutes. It was a lovely conversation. I don't know that my predecessor had met her face to face, but I essentially gave her a review of what we had done in the past, where we were at the present moment, and where we hope to go. And couldn't have been a better use of time. She felt like she'd been brought up to speed on where we were and was very happy with it. And she was happy where we wanted to go too, and what we had done thus far. So absolutely hand deliver the grant application, please, please, please. One of the things that you want to do is you want to inquire about the grant's progress. After a certain period of times, whatever the review period is, after about half of it, you want to call. And you don't want to be a pest. You don't want to be a nag. You simply want to say, hi, I'm Charlie Greenwalt from Greene County, and not like, how's it going, but you say, now that you've had a chance to review our grant application, is there any more information that you might need? Is there any other information that we can supply to you? In other words, you're calling and you're offering to help them review through the review process. And that goes much better than simply bugging them about the dates. Then about 3/4 of the way through the review period, you go to your congressman. You go to your congressman's office and you ask them to do the same thing. Now, generally, the congressional staff will do this for you. If you have a real crackerjack congressman that is really willing to put in the time, they might make the call themselves. Now, you go to the U.S. House members. You do not go to the Senate members. Remember, all money requests start in the House. When we're talking about appropriations and funding, the House, U.S. House, is key. So that's who you want to go and talk to. We were very fortunate to have a Republican congressman by the name of J. Kenneth Robinson representing Central Virginia, who just was very, very friendly, was heavily involved in the community, grew up there, went to school there, spent his career there, and he would do anything to help you make the area that he grew up in and represented a better area to live and work. Let's see. Well, another thing you want to do is obtain the help of additional agencies. You will find that you want to get the support of cognate agencies, C-O-G-N-A-T-E, C-O-G-N-A-T-E, cognate agencies. Cognate agencies are, and I want you to remember this definition, please. Cognate agencies are agencies that do the same thing that you do. They perform the same functions that your organization performs, but they do it in a different geographic jurisdiction. If you get to know a few cognate agencies and develop good relationships with them, I had one with the Jefferson Area Transit Authority. One of the things that we did in Greene County that my office did was we provided transportation for low and moderate income individuals. Now, that was just one thing we did. We had 2 vans on the road every day. We had 3 or 4 van drivers, 2 working at any one time, and one van went around the county and took low and moderate income people where they needed to go in the county. The other van went to the main center of commerce and health care in the area, and that was Charlottesville, and that van went every day from Standardsville, our county seat, down to Charlottesville. You find that that's the kind of transportation services we offered, but we offered many others. The Jefferson Area Transit Authority just offered transportation, nothing more, but they serve 5 counties, and I got to know the chairman of that particular the executive director, of that particular organization, and we became good friends. So when he wrote grants for new buses, I always gave him letters of support, telling the federal reviewers what a good job they did, and they did do a good job. And he did the same for me. One of the things we applied for while I was there was a new minivan, a new van with a wheelchair lift. We had not had any wheelchair lifts before, so we could transport wheelchair-bound people. And he gave me a very nice letter of support when we applied for one, and we were awarded it from the United States Department of Transportation. Let's see. So now these letters of support come from cognate agencies, and you want to put them in your application, but you also want to put letters of support from political leaders. Every grant application that I ever wrote, I went and I asked all the political leaders to supply us a letter saying that they supported it as well. That would mean that you would go to all your local and county officials, and you went to your state officials and your federal officials, and you asked them all for letters of support for this particular request. And you they put them on their letterhead, and you put them in an appendix of your grant application. So you want to get that. Lastly, you also want to get letters of support from potential clients. One of the programs that we participated in was a Farmers Home Administration program. Very few people knew about it. It would give individuals money to make housing repairs. If you were a low and moderate income individual and you needed certain repairs to your house, you could apply for up to $5,000. Again, $5,000 today sounds like nothing. In 1979, 1980, 81, that was a nice chunk of change. That was a good piece of money, and we're talking again about the South, where the money went far further. So I hired college, university students, and we did something that we had never done before. We did a survey of housing in Greene County. They swept across the county, and they took pictures of each and every house, and then we ranked them. We put them in a rating of that they were in excellent shape, they were in good shape, they were in an average shape, and bad shape. And what we did then, once we had all the houses located that were in bad shape, we sent out the university people again, and we asked them to go to the house and ask all the people that lived there if they wanted to put in a grant application for $5,000 for roof repair, furnace repair, insulation, whatever the case may be, flooring repair. And we had 25 people that said yes, they wanted to participate. So we told them we would help them write the grant. And in many instances, some of these people were illiterate. So yes, we helped them write the grant, or we sat down and they told us everything that we needed to know, and we wrote the grant for them. We submitted all the grants to the Farmers Home Administration, and we were awarded 23 of them. Now, what we also said is once that process is over, we would help supervise or provide supervision to the people then who would be hired to do the work, and make sure that the work was done and done properly, and then that the paperwork that was required to complete the process would be filed as well. And we were able to do that. So we went to one of these homes to take pictures of it to put in the grant application. And the elderly lady's family had come by, and they had read it up. They had cut the grass, they had swept, they had organized everything to make the place look very nice from the outside. And they took her to the local beauty parlor. They bought her a new dress, and it just looked like a picture from Southern Living. And in fact, that's what we did not want. We want a picture that was accurate and what really showed the situation as it was. And so my one lady that handled housing, she said, "You look great, but could we please mess up your hair a little bit? We promise to put it back the way it was when we leave, but we don't want you to look this good. And we put the trash back on the porch, and made the place look like it had. And then we took the picture of her, and she wrote us a letter. Thank goodness she had rheumatoid arthritis, and it was kind of like, please award us this money, or I'm sure to die this winter from the cold air. And she got the grant, but her family wanted her to look like Martha Stewart, and in fact, that's not how things really were, and we wanted to have an accurate picture. So you can get letters of support from potential clients, from all the politicians, and from cognate agencies. Okay? Um, let's see. Um, okay. This should go without saying, but many instances people forget it. You need to cultivate good relations all the time with federal grantors. Um, Once I was awarded the federal money to renew the grant to keep our office up and running, we finally, the next year, we got a, well, after that was over, that process was over, we got a letter then saying you're going to be receive a field inspection. For the very first time, our office had been up and running for 6 years and never had a field inspection. Now we're going to get one. I've just been on the job for a couple months, and I don't know everything that I need to know. It takes about a year until you feel fully conversant, fully acquainted with the federal program. But I had great staff. They may not have been able to write as well as me. They may not have had the academic credentials, but they knew their programs. And we had a staff meeting, and everybody had their assignments, and everybody cleaned up the office, organized all the files so that every I was dotted and T was crossed, and we were ready for the visit of the person who was coming down from Philadelphia. I picked them up on a Friday night at the airport, took them to the hotel, and then, no, that would have been, I'm sorry, a Thursday night, excuse me. And then on Friday morning, I picked them up at the hotel and brought them to the office on Friday morning. They spent all morning going through the files, and they asked to go to the Senior Nutrition Center. And I said, sure, I'd be happy to take you out there. And as we got in the car, I asked him how it was going, and he said, well, everything seems to be in order, but you have one problem. And I said, well, what is it? And he wouldn't say. He would not say. So we're on the way out to the Senior Nutrition Center, and he sees this huge sale by the side of the road, and he has to stop. And I said, oh, sure, I'll stop for you. Here it turns out that his hobby, his wife had an antique store in Doylestown. And he was always on the lookout for new antiques that he could put into the store. So I walked through the site with him. I know nothing about antiques at the time, but I can ask questions, certainly. He came upon this huge, massive amount of comic books, and he said, oh, I'd love to put these in the shop, but I can't take these back on the plane. So what should Charlie say at this point? Charlie should say, and I did, that's all right. I'd be happy to take these off your hands. You buy them, and I'll package them, and I'll send them to you as a favor. And I said I'd do that, and he was so happy, so grateful and thankful. So we got that done, and then on the way over to the Senior Nutrition Center, he's telling me more about his antique store. We get to the site, and as we go in, here we had this ratty old table. We always put fresh flowers on to try to make everybody feel better when they came in. And they came in the center, and he started to gush and ooh and ah about this little old table. And I looked at the Senior Nutrition Center director, and I said, after he got out of earshot, we got to sell that and take the money and buy more food for the program. I had no idea that table was worth anything. But he reviewed everything we did at the Senior Nutrition Center, and then on the way back to the county seat, he did tell me what he thought our problem was. Thought our problem was that we have an advisory board. Every community action agency has a board of citizens comprised of low and moderate income that give them ideas as to what they should be doing and supervise and overlook the office. And we did, and we thought our board was pretty good. He thought so too, except he thought the chairman was no longer of low and moderate income, and that he was no longer a poor person and didn't understand the plight of the poor anymore, because he had his own bricklaying company, and he probably didn't know what it was like to be poor anymore. Well, I assured him that that wasn't the case, and I asked him to meet the guy. He said that he would. I called Carl, and Carl said come over to the house, and he would leave his job site early and meet us. Well, Carl, who was the head of our group of citizens, had come from a family of 13. He was an African American male, probably in his mid-50s at that point, and had grown up very poor and had worked hard to complete high school, first member of his family to complete high school. And then he went on to an apprentice program where he learned how to be a bricklayer, and eventually started his own company, and he worked years to make it a success. And once he made it a success, he was everywhere in the community. He volunteered to be a Little League baseball coach. He volunteered to help with any cause that any agency needed. He was very active in his church, for example. He was one of the best citizens that we had. So he worked very hard to pull him and his family up, and he succeeded. But my friend, the reviewer, said that Carl, he looked at his information that was in the grant application, and they had to send along information that he earned too much money to qualify as the chair, to qualify as a member of the board, and so that everything we did would be null and void. And I said, well, sit down and meet this guy. This guy actually used to, true enough, put newspapers around his feet and tie them with binder twine to go to school when he was very, very young. I know this sounds like something that you've heard before, a stereotype, but he were very, very poor. And so we sat down with him, and at one point the reviewer essentially said to Carl, I'm sorry, but you make too much money, and anyone that makes this amount of money, we don't think that you know what it's like to be poor anymore. Well, Carl formed a massive fist, pounded his dining room table. I think it popped up off the floor about 2 inches, and he said, let me tell you, until you have put your mouth under a water spigot and turned it on full blast just to fill your belly with water so you don't have hunger pangs, until you've done that, you don't know what it's like to be poor. I've done that many times in my youth and early adulthood. He said, don't tell me that I don't know what it's like to be poor. And he went on giving example after example. And we left, and as we were driving back to the office, the reviewer looked at me and he said, Carl, he'll be just fine. No problem. And we never had a problem again. And interestingly enough, after I sent the comic books to him, I never had anything but strong support from that regional office of Community Services Administration, and from that officer. Every time I talked to him on the phone, I'd ask him about antiques and what was going on at his antique shop, and he was more than happy to tell me. And what I'm saying is, it's nice to find common interests of the people that you work with and to cultivate good relations. It will make everything go much better. Okay? So, cultivating excellent relationship with the grantors is a thing that you can do. Obtaining clearinghouse help is another thing you can do. There's just two more tips. The second last tip, obtaining clearinghouse help. Every state has something called clearinghouses. Clearinghouses their job is to review grants for federal money, and essentially what they're trying to do is to make sure that there's no duplication of effort. They want to make sure that this function that you're proposing to offer is not already done in some way or shape or form in that area. We find in Virginia, regional land use planning agencies were the clearinghouses. They had been in Pennsylvania as well. But in Virginia, I had to go to the Charlottesville, it was the Central Virginia Planning, Central Virginia Planning Association. We had in Virginia at that time, I believe we had 124 counties. In Pennsylvania right now, we only have 67 counties, the same as Florida. We have 67 counties in Pennsylvania, but Virginia with far less population, at 124 counties. As I said, our county was only 14,000 people, Greene County. But the clearinghouse was located in Charlottesville and was for several of the counties in central Virginia, Albemarle County, Greene County, Nelson County, Fluvanna County, Orange County, for example. It would handle all the planning issues. So they were the clearinghouse. They would review all the grant requests that went to the federal government, would first be reviewed by them, and they would see if it had merit, if it was a legitimate request, and then they would hold a hearing. And they would invite all the interested parties to testify and then decide whether or not to push it on to the federal government or to kill it. So for all the grants that I wrote for the federal government, I had to go through that particular agency, and I became very good friends with one woman who did a lot of this work. Her husband was a professor at the University of Virginia at the School of Architecture, actually. Great person, and she taught me a lot about grants. But what would happen is one of the jobs of the clearinghouse is to provide technical assistance, and that means to help you write grants. So when I was writing the federal grants, I would go into Charlottesville and I would ask to meet with Jane, and she would sit down with me and she'd help me write the grant application. And then when it was all done, and I'd go back to Greene County, we would reformat it, we'd put it in final form, and we would submit it to the clearinghouse. It went right back to Charlottesville, and it went right back into Jane's hands. Well, what do you think she's going to do with a grant proposal that she helped write and that she thought was fabulous? Obviously, she was going to approve it. So you would be foolish, very foolish, if you did not take advantage of the technical help for grant writing that's available from the clearinghouse itself, because they're going to have to come back and review it. So get the help of clearinghouses. One last thing that I would suggest to you, and that was to use very creative in-kind matches. Many grants require matches. In other words, they will give you 90% of what you're requesting, and you have to give locally 10%, for example. Why do they require a local participation? They require local participation so that you have a stake in the game. You're not just getting federal money for free and not investing anything in this effort as well. They believe that if the local folks, the state and the local folks, are investing in the program as well, that you're committed to it and you're going to do a better job. So many times they're going to ask for matching funds. Well, one thing that you can do is sometimes you don't have to give money. You can give something called an in-kind match. An in-kind match would be a match of time, effort, or materials that would come from the state or the locality to help the federal government perform this function, whatever it might be. And so we did that. And one of the ways we did that is every time the county administrator got a new car, every 2 years, the car would be donated to our office, and I would give the car to the lady who, we had one lady who checked on senior citizens. She would go up into the hollows and up into the mountains where there were no roads in some instances, and walk up the side of the mountain. And she checked on everyone over 65 to make sure they weren't dead, they weren't eaten by bears, whatever. And for that program, we gave Sarah the use of this county administrator automobile. And what we did was, this was a grant from Virginia Tech. And so what we did was we put the use of the county administrator's car down as a matching grant, an in-kind matching grant. It wasn't money, it was the use of the car, and we valued the car at $10,000. And so that is how we would do this. This came in very handy in the Senior Citizens Center. One of the things that we did there all the time for activities, things that the vast majority of clients were women, and we did all sorts of things for them. We took them to museums, we took them to choral performances, we brought poets in, we brought musicians in to perform for them, we had readings, we played bingo, but the thing they liked to do the most was simply quilt. They loved to quilt. We had quilting racks, and they would produce beautiful quilts. And then after the quilt was done, we would raffle the quilt off through the community, and the money that we realized from that was used to buy more materials to make the next quilt. So at one point, a little light went on in my head and said, oh my gosh, I asked the supervisor of the center to keep track of who was working on the quilt and how many hours they worked on it. And when it was all done, we'd add those hours up and we would value them at minimum wage. And then we would say that was an in-kind contribution to this program, and it was. All these people were working, they were raising money, helping to raise money for the program itself. And so that way we could leverage additional money from the federal government. So use creativity in terms of in-kind matches, and that will help you leverage more money from Washington, D.C. if you need it. And that was my job, simply to try to bring as many funds from Richmond, Virginia, and from Washington, D.C. as possible to help mitigate the problems that the low and moderate income had in Greene County at that time. Okay, well that pretty much wraps it up on grantsmanship. If you have any questions on it, call me, email me, text me.